Alright, this is a tutorial on how to create the components of a toilet paper airplane. So the idea here is just to show you a possible finished product, something like this. You've got a roll of toilet paper and your job is to design and print the components that will go with it. Not an easy task, but hopefully something fun for the kids and you to be able to create and print. So the goal here is to just kind of go through how that process works, because there's quite a bit of stuff that is involved in it. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to be in Autodesk 123D Design, a free program. I highly recommend downloading it and using it with your students. A lot of different things that you can do. You can still use SketchUp or Tinkercad, a few other products, but this one I see as being the easiest to manage for this particular project. So this is a general overview of the one that I printed, but we're going to go to a new one. I went up to the sketch feature and sketch a circle. So knowing that we're dealing with a diameter of 43 millimeters, I'm going to go ahead and click once and give myself a diameter of 42.5. The goal here is to be able to fit the nose into the fuselage, or the toilet paper roll in this case. So I want it to be able to fit nice and snug, don't want it to be too loose, so I went 42.5 millimeters. And you're going to get a little bit of play, a little bit of wiggle room. You can also go much larger, so you can go 43.5 or 44 on the interior diameter, inside diameter, and go with it that way. Your choice there. Now, I don't want just a cone. I need something to be able to adhere to the inside, in my case, the inside of the toilet paper roll. So what I did was I went and extruded it 5 millimeters. Not much, just enough. Okay. And the next piece is to go to the solids, or the primitives rather here, and we're going to insert a cone. And the cone is going to have a radius, and now I've got 42.5 millimeters, so I need 21.25 millimeters for the radius. You can see it automatically sorts that out for us, and our height is going to be, we'll call it a 25 millimeter height. So I hit enter and I've got my nose. The problem is that it's not put together. So what I can do is, now something else that you may or may not notice is I've intentionally placed the center of each of these circles on a distinct axis. So I've got it at the intersection of 25 and 50, in this case 75 and 50, because it makes it easier for me to move it. So I'm going to tilt down a little bit, and there we go. So I'll select it and I'll click move. I'm going to move it up 5 millimeters. You should see what's going on here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually move this piece on top of the other. And knowing that I'm 50 millimeters apart, I can move it 50 millimeters. And you might say, oh, well, that's just fine. I can just eyeball it. The hard part is you're dealing in 3 dimensions here. So if I think that it's right over top of it, it may not be. So I've got this one solid piece right now. It's going to be a pretty heavy piece if I try to print that whole entire thing out. The nose is going to be extremely heavy, hard for us to manage. So the next thing that I did was I went through here. So I'm going to select I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to use the command feature, and we're going to merge that selection. So now it's one big piece. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create another cone. And this one is going to have a much smaller radius. Not much smaller, a smaller radius. And we'll call that one 19. Ooh. And the height, so the height of the first one was 25, so we're going to call this 27. And hopefully you'll see what I'm doing here. So I've created this, and next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move it 50 millimeters. There we go. So now I have a cone inside of the cone and cylinder combination. So what I want to do is, and I might have to mess with this a little bit, but I want to subtract this piece, this piece. So I hit enter and it worked. So I want to select, the first thing that I want to select is what I want to stay. The second piece that I select is what I want to move. So if you notice here, I've now gutted the interior of this nose. This is just one way of doing it, but it worked for me. It helped out quite a bit. The next part is designing and carrying out the product of the wings. So the wings, as mentioned before, or not as mentioned, but the toilet paper roll, as mentioned before, is 43 millimeters wide. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to build something that would have at least that. And let me come a little bit further up. So I've got 43 millimeters. And I want it to have, I don't want to have too much weight on the wings. It'll be too heavy. It won't be able to carry enough flight. It'll still be able to fly, just won't be able to carry enough flight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this at 30 millimeters. And I've got myself a fancy little rectangle. Next up, I'm going to use the sketch tool. I'm going to go to creating a polyline. And an important piece here is being able to select the right plane. So if you notice, I've got this plane here and I've got this plane here. This right here, I'm going to consider as my base plane. And I'm going to go ahead and select it. I can select the corner here. And actually, I'll start, just to make it a little bit easier to manage, I'll start down here. And I'm going to build a wing that is 75 millimeters long here. And that'll be easy to replicate because then I go on the other side. And this one, it's not wanting to select it, so I'll select it here. So I'll go 75 millimeters. Easy fix, 75. And come back to it here. And there we go. All right, so I've got my wings. Extremely thin and not functional right now, but I've got my wings. The next thing that I want to do is I want to give it some depth. So I'm going to go to the extrude button and I'm going to bring this up 3 millimeters. Once again, don't want too much mass because I don't want to have to deal with all that force being applied to the airplane as it's being flown. I want to be able to have as much freedom to fly as possible. And then I'm going to extrude each of the wings This one I'm going to go a little bit thicker than my original, and you'll see why. Might be thinking, wow, that's a pretty thick wing, and it's not going to be very efficient. And if you're thinking that, you would be right. But the beauty of SketchUp, the beauty of 123D design is the ability to round. Something that you want to consider is an airfoil. So as the plane is flying, wind is going to be flying from this direction to the back, so front to back. Right now, if I tried to fly the airplane, there's really no lift being generated. What I want to be able to do is I want to have as flat of a bottom as I can, which will be easy for us to do, and as rounded, smooth of an edge here. Let me show you how to do that. All right, so I'm going to end up combining these as one object, make it a little bit easier for me to round off the edges and fillet. You'll see what I'm talking about here. So as I fillet, I'm creating that airfoil. And there are some constraints within SketchUp, but just to make it a nice even number, we'll call it 20. And on the front side of it, we'll fillet. So we want to have a nice rounded front. Not too much, but a nice rounded front to create that airfoil. So we'll go 2.5. This will actually look like a pretty cool design. We'll go 2.5 here. And spinning this around, we'll delete all the junk that was created. And we've got ourselves an airplane wing. Still a little bit thick, but that may work, it may not. That'll be a nice part to test out with your students. It's got a slight curve in the front. It's got a nice round to the back to be able to slope down. We want that air to be able to swirl over. We want it to be able to travel more on the top than the bottom. If that happens, then we generate lift. The last piece is developing a vertical stabilizer, and so to do so, we're going to go here and there. And I'm just kind of freehand drawing this right now. It's going to end up looking different than what your students will end up doing. So this is going to be the stabilizer, and so we'll extrude it just a little bit there. What I want to do though is I want to be able to create some sort of groove. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back it down a little bit. I'm actually going to try to build in a little bit of it, a little bit of a stabilization piece. There. Okay, and here, back, over, and up. All right, so the goal here on this piece is to be able to have something that can slip in and then be adhered. So what the groove does is it allows us to insert the stabilizer, and the groove allows us to keep it there. So I'm going to take these and I'm going to merge them into one. Not yet. Extrude 3 millimeters, and that may be too much, so I'll go 2 millimeters. So we've got that piece, and now it's just a matter of printing it out and testing it out, really just trying to see what works, what doesn't. Now it's a matter of going on, watching some YouTube videos, talking about airfoil, talking about angle of inclination, angle of incidence, getting as involved or not as you'd like. I will say that this is nothing fancy, but it does fly, and it's a pretty fun little project. So hopefully this helps on creating your first ever toilet paper airplane.